Wholesalers, it's Rob Shore at Wholesaler Masterminds, and you may be thinking to yourself, Rob, you're thinking, what do you have besides this amazing podcast? And I'm so glad you asked. Wholesaler Masterminds has an assortment of product and services all designed around the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. As an example, we have coaching services designed to help you power wash your practice, whether you have 2 years or 22 years. We'll offer you speaking live engagements at divisional or national sales meetings. Our scheduling service has dedicated professionals trained in the art of getting you more appointments, Wholesaler Mastermind schedulers. Our Speakers Bureau brings you amazing speakers and processes to get better return on investment out of those speakers. And finally, our newest partnership with Allego. If you have Allego and want to get the Wholesaler Masterminds channel on your Allego platform, please let us know. Wholesaler Masterminds, happy to bring you this podcast and so much more. Wholesaler Masterminds, the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. Got a question today about your potential, wholesalers. Are you living up to your true potential? Do you feel like you have more potential? I mean, you might be the best wholesaler in your field, but that doesn't mean you can't get better. Maybe you haven't maximized your potential. We'll be back to talk about that in just a second. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. Mark Sanborn is back for his unprecedented third appearance on the Wholesaler Masterminds podcast. He's a certified speaking professional. He also is a member of the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame. His client list reads like a Fortune 5000 who's who, 2,400 different clients he has spoken in front of. There's a high likelihood you might know him from books like The Fred Factor, or You Don't Need a Title to Be a Leader. But we're here to talk about his most recent book, his newest tome. We need to know all about it. It's called The Potential Principle. Mark Sanborn, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show.
Hey, Rob, thanks. Always good to be with you.
Thank you, sir. So where did this book bubble up from? You have been a prolific author. This one obviously emanated from somewhere. Where did it come from?
It percolated up from about 30 years of developing what I write about in the book. I didn't 30 years ago know I read a book called The Potential Principle. And by the way, I should probably interject. The Potential Principle is very simple. We all know how good we become, but none of us know how good we could be. I've never met anybody, and you and I have met a lot of highly successful people, but I've never met anyone that could prove to me they had maximized their full potential. And the reason for that is we really don't know what we're capable of. And that's part of what the book's about, that we're all capable, typically, of far more than we think. So over the years, working with successful companies and successful individuals and developing a system that I use myself, I was just using the worksheets from the book today at lunch, I decided to try to come up with something that would help the best get better. Now, if you are a beginner, a neophyte, you're new to personal and professional development, there's a lot of great ideas in the book. But really, what I wanted to do is help people who are already pretty doggone good, because the better you get, the harder it is to get better. When you start out, improvement is fast and moderately easy. The longer you go, the better you get, the more incremental and hard-fought those improvements are. So I wrote this book, and it's really kind of been gestating in the background for over the past 30 years.
Mark, why isn't good enough? And I'm not being a wise guy in that. I mean, why isn't good enough? I mean, your audience today, in a lot of cases, are high income, very successful, somewhere at or near the top of their game. Why can't that be it? I mean, why should I be looking for more potential?
Well, if you're planning to retire tomorrow and you don't need to stay on the top of your game to be competitive in the marketplace, then, good may be good enough, at least for your business practice, if not for your golf game. However, the roadside is littered with the bodies of once dominant market players, blockbuster comes to mind. It wasn't that many years ago. We were driving over to pick up our videos and then return them. And then Netflix and Redbox and Hulu and the streaming content producers came along, and Blockbuster is an artifact. It's an ancient memory, right? So the reason I say to get better in the book, really there's two sets of reasons. One is professional. Your customers, your competition, and your changes in your marketplace require it if you're going to maintain your competitiveness. But at a personal level, it's about purpose and having more to give to the people you live and work with. It's not just about becoming some kind of self-absorbed or pository of success. It's about becoming a better person so that you can make a little bigger, better difference in the world around you. And I think that's a win-win. We become better, we do better, and we influence more people more positively. And that's kind of the Reader's Digest version of why I think we all have both the opportunity and the need to get better. Now, if you choose to stay the same, it's America. You can be mediocre. It's one of the freedoms that we possess. But most of the people listening today, and most of the people that will pick up the book, unless there's a few mean people that want to make fun of it, most people that will pick up the book are already people that say, I'd like to narrow the gap between how good I am and how good I could be.
What do you think prevents people from reaching their potential? What there's so much that goes on between our ears any given day, any given hour for that matter. What are the roadblocks?
Well, I said this back years ago in the Fred Factor, and it's still true in the potential principle. The big problem is awareness. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean. People say, I'm aware that I've got more potential. Yeah, but you don't think about it consciously every day. If I said today to you, Rob, to your listeners, hey, today's as good as you're ever going to be, you may not get worse, but you'll never get better. Likely, from here on out, it's all downhill. Your relationships, your earning powers, your successes, they're all peaked out right now. The rest of your life is only as good as this or less good, right? If I said that and I said, now, are you happy? You wouldn't say, oh, yeah, that's cool. I mean, because most people don't want to think that today is as good as they're ever going to be. However, most people never consciously think about what they're going to do to make sure that tomorrow's better. In other words, there's kind of this lack of awareness, right? And as I say in my work with clients, nobody gets better accidentally with age except wine. Wine is the only thing that gets better with age accidentally. The rest of us have to be intentional. And the problem with being intentional and aware is a lot of stuff, jockeying for our attention, whether it's your son getting a speeding ticket, and I speak from experience there, recent experience, or it's, your demands at work or your needs to work on the house over the weekend. And so as a result, a lot of those higher level thought processes, like how do I intentionally design a way to get better every day, they get pushed to the back burner.
I want to talk about that for just 1 second, because we've never been more consumed or assaulted, depending on your perspective, with data or information that is so readily available ever. How do I separate all of that? How do I make the mind space to even get my head around something like realizing my potential? You work with hundreds of high caliber management folks. How do you begin? I even start to process that?
Well, you start with a simple question, better at what? And the answer that I would give is better at what matters. There's so many things that we do out of habit that really don't matter. I'm kind of a news junkie, and I may have even said this the last time we spoke, but I used to read 2 newspapers a day. I still watch news channels when I'm exercising in the morning, but I'm almost done with even watching news channels, and I certainly don't read 2 newspapers a day because there's a lot of redundancy. What I realized is that a lot of that wasn't true education, it was just entertainment. I find it fascinating. Politics, world events, geopolitical stuff, that's just interesting to me. The reality is not much I can do about it, and that's not really within the scope of my work as a speaker and leadership consultant. Sure, it's good to be informed, but nothing I've learned in the last 2 weeks is going to impact what happens in Washington, D.C. or around the world tomorrow. So I started to, and I regularly ask myself, what really matters? Don't ever confuse entertainment with education. The things that matter are things like, significant relationships, your health, your business, or if you're an employee, your career path. And one of the things I say early in the book is just that question, what do you want to get better at? And I think there's two kinds of people that are going to gravitate towards the book. Kind of the people who just generally want to get better, and God bless them, I'm certainly have been among those people. But what I really hope is that people who have a very specific area they want to improve in will use both the potential matrix and the 4 breakthrough tools that I talk about to get better first in those areas that are most important to them. Because as you already said, Rob, there's just too much stuff out there. That's the bad news. The good news is most of it really doesn't matter.
And I so appreciate that answer. And it's really making a conscious decision to wall off things that you, as you suggested, ultimately decided don't make a difference to you. And I love the way that you framed it. It's really entertainment more than anything else. Sometimes sad entertainment, but entertainment nonetheless.
Exactly.
When it comes to leaders getting better, what's the biggest change you've seen in working with leaders over time? And I guess, wholesalers, that's a question that Mark could give me on a piece of paper. I want to embellish that a little bit. So you've been working with leaders how long, Mark? How many years?
31.
31 years you've been working with leaders. Let's really look around that for a second. What do you think? What do you think are the impediments, and what do you think are the better opportunities for leaders to improve today, both impediments and opportunities, versus leaders 31 years ago?
Well, that's a good spin on the question. And the reality is the principles of leadership have not changed, because principles don't change. Principles are timeless. What changes is how we apply those principles. Integrity, character, clear communication, the ability to cast and achieve a vision. Those are principles that haven't and won't change. What changes is how we go about doing that. So let me just answer kind of the first question, and then I'll get to the secondary about impediments and opportunities. Okay. The biggest change in leadership, by my observation, hasn't been in leadership, it's been in followership. And that is, not too many people today want to be followers. They don't want to be called followers. They don't want to be known as followers, because follower has kind of a demeaning tinge to it. It suggests that you're a person that's a toady, a lemming. You do what you're told. You follow the instructions, right? Well, first of all, if you have people like that on your team, that's not a good team. You want people that think and create and contribute. So what I say to leaders is change the way you talk about your team. Call them team members, call them collaborators, call them contributors, call them innovators. Don't make up words, but use words that best describe what it is you want from the people in your employ or the people who look to you as a leader. I think the big change has been in followership, and the change is they don't think they're followers. They want to be valued as more than just followers. And 31 years ago, life was a lot more simple. 31 years ago, we didn't know what we didn't know. Right now with all of the craziness around taking down statues, do they glorify, the wrong thing? I'm not going to comment on that. I have enough problems without getting sucked into that debate. But I'll tell you this, 30 years from now, we're going to look back at some of the stuff we thought was spectacularly brilliant, and we're going to cringe and go, oh my God, we had no idea. We don't know what we don't know. And 30 years ago, it was a control and command economy, more or less. I mean, it had just started to change. But the idea there was, you got people, you told them what to do, they did it. That was much more a management function than a leadership function. Back then, people probably had lower expectations. I'm not saying that people weren't as good or as smart or as capable. I'm just saying back then we went into the workplace and a lot of people were really happy to put in their time, retire with a gold watch and a nice pension. That's changed a good bit thanks to technology and lots of other things. So today the impediment is getting locked into this mindset, especially if you're an older leader that says, hey, I pay them to do what they're told. No, you pay them to do what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is often better determined by them than it is by you. You've got to move from this control and command to, commitment and inspiration and getting people excited and linking what they do every day to a bigger purpose. Those are the impediments. The opportunities are simple. People are better skilled. They have more tools than we had 30 years ago. 30 years ago, think about technology, Rob. 30 years ago, technology let us do what we already were doing just a little more efficiently, right? Instead of a calculator, you had a spreadsheet. Instead of a typewriter, you had a word processor. Well, today you have artificial intelligence and big data, and technology is allowing us to do things we hadn't even imagined 30 years ago. So with better tools and better capabilities, I think the opportunities are to get people really involved in creating value and not just following instructions.
Take me over to this tool that you've developed, please, the potential matrix. Tell us a little bit about it. Tell us a little bit how we're supposed to use it. And when people buy the book and crack it open and start to dive into it, what are they going to benefit from? What are they going to get out of it? How is it going to help them? How is it going to help guide them to a better outcome as far as their potential goes?
You bet. Well, the potential matrix is a very simple and effective tool that is probably a little harder to explain verbally than it is to view and understand visually. And what I can do, Rob, is if you have show notes, I will send you that matrix.
Awesome.
But in a nutshell, there's an inner world and outer world. The outer world is the outer world of performing and learning. It's what we do that's visible to others. The inner world is the world of purpose and values and thinking and contemplation. Those things are not readily available to others except as they inform our behavior and our learning. In a nutshell, what I found is that some people have really developed inner worlds. People who are in philanthropy or ministry or who work in charities. They have a deep sense of mission and passion and values. And the way that you can often help them is help them develop those outer world skills. How do you have a good meeting? How do you write a good speech? How do you delegate? But the people that I work with, the people that you work with in business, are very, very focused on that outer world, or the quadrant I call performing. And the problem with that is that very often at some point they bump up against this big existential question about, hey, what the heck was that about? Why did I bust my hump? Why did I burn through a marriage? Why did I not spend as much time with my kids? Does what I do every day really matter? So the big picture is this. You need to, if you're going to fully develop your potential, marry your inner world and outer world and spend time developing skills in both places. So the 4 quadrants are learning, performing, thinking, and reflecting. And to the degree that you get away from what you're most comfortable with and you're most fond of, and you start becoming better at thinking, or better at learning, or better at contemplation and getting insights through reflection, all of those things will leverage each other, and ultimately they'll give you a lot more power in that performing quadrant, which is where you get the customer, make the sale, or get the raise.
One of the quadrants that you talked about, I'd like to dig in a little bit if you'll let me, and that is the whole reflecting piece. One of the things we talk about at Wholesaler Masterminds is wholesaling by nature is a next business. What's the next call I have to make? What's the next appointment I have to set up? What's the next boarding pass I have to download? What's the next piece of literature I have to send a client? What's the next follow-up communication I need? What's the next email that came in? Next. It never ends. So one of the things we talk about at Wholesaler Masterminds is the importance of taking more time to think about what happened in the last appointment, more time to think about what happened on that last call, to be reflective, because we're not very good at it. How do you suggest, if you are not reflective, besides perhaps some obvious pathways, how would you suggest people like us that are in this world, high pressure sales, how do you envision you become more reflective?
I devote a whole chapter to that in the book, because I say it's the hardest thing for most people that I work with to do, myself included. I talk about some specifics, but let me just kind of clarify for listeners. When you think about something, you pursue an idea. When you reflect, you receive. In other words, reflection is where you get those insights that you go, oh, wow, I never realized that. Or you get the epiphany. Or an idea comes to you that you weren't even pursuing. So I know sometimes people want to glom the two together, but I make a distinction that thinking is something you initiate, but reflecting is something you respond to. And to specifically answer your question, here's the big hurdle. You got to stop what you're doing. I think Blaise Pascal said, man's biggest liability is his inability to sit quietly in a room. try it. Just try sitting and not doing anything. And when I say sitting and not doing anything, I mean not actively thinking about stuff, because your brain is kind of like this vacuum, and if you don't have something to think about, ideas rush in, right, all the way from the inane to the important. But reflecting is where you really just kind of settle yourself, and you open yourself up to ideas. Sometimes you can reflect upon a subject. You might reflect on a relationship, or you might reflect on your business. You might reflect on your purpose. But what I'm really trying to do there is slow down long enough for good ideas to catch me, to kind of use a familiar phrase. And that's the problem with moving at 100 miles an hour with your hair on fire. Not only do you not get to think, thinking is hard. Personally, I think reflecting is even harder.
Now, that is not a familiar phrase. Slow down long enough for good ideas to catch me. Unless that's a Mark Sanbornism that I've not heard, that's a new one for me, and I love it. So I thank you for sharing.
Go ahead and quote me, because over time, then people will attribute it to me, and everybody will be happy, especially me.
Let me just have you frame out one last comment that you make in the literature about the book as it resides on your website presently. You say you can make your best second best. Tell me about that before we go.
Well, we all think that becoming the best at what we do is the hardest work we have. I mean, I used to think that until I realized that the only thing harder than becoming the best at what you do is becoming the best and getting better. See, if you're number two, you watch number one, and you can out-execute number one's ideas, and you can become number one. However, when you're number one, there's nobody to emulate. There's nobody to copy. There's nobody doing the research, nobody taking the arrows in the back or losing the money so you don't have to. So I think it's infinitely harder when you're at the top of your game to get better than when you're number 2 or number 3 or number 10. If you can wake up every day with it doesn't have to be some kind of motivational, hypey kind of a thing, but if you can just wake up with a consciousness that says, my big goal for the day professionally is to be just a little bit better in some way than I was yesterday. Michelle Weiner Davis, I never met Michelle. I wish I had. She sounds like an interesting person. She's a cognitive behavioral psychologist. And she once said that her goal was to cheat yesterday's client by being a little bit better today than she was yesterday. She said she always brought her best game to every client every day. But if she's better tomorrow than she is today, well, sorry, but you didn't get quite as much as her patient tomorrow would get. And I call that constructive cheating, right? Because you just want to be getting a little, you're not going to be 10% better tomorrow. You're not even going to be 1% better tomorrow. But if you can bring a little more focus to an important phone call, or be a little more reflective when somebody shares some important information with you, those little improvements are cumulative. And over time, you start to see dramatic shifts in your life.
Wholesalers, I hope you're getting the sense that the new book, The Potential Principle, is a book worth purchasing and are lessons worth reading and insights worth gleaning from Mark Sanborn. Mark, thanks again for being with us today.
Hey, my pleasure. And by the way, if someone does pick up the book, there's the free worksheets and summaries and discussion guides. Just go to potentialprinciple.com, put in the proof of purchase from wherever you bought it. It's very easy to do. It's brain damage free, and you'll get the PDFs of those ancillary tools that you can use to go along with the book. Rob, thank you for having me. Always glad to be here. Always glad to come back.
My pleasure, Mark. Wholesalers, we'll link everything up in the show notes. Come back next time for another episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. You'll find all of our content at wholesalermasterminds.com, and the podcast can be found at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.